In case anyone's forgotten, Jess Phillips is a massive bitch. There's just no getting away from that. She upbraided people for talking about how much better the UK is than, say, Pakistan or whatever, by talking about the fact that 2 women a week are murdered in the UK, glossing over, not even mentioning the fact that 4 men are murdered every week in the UK. She famously laughed at male suicide. Look up Sniggergate. I did a video on it. You can go and view that. She laughed at the very idea of talking about men's issues while men and boys are failing across society in ways that we wouldn't countenance if they were happening to women, or still happening to women. She famously compared the mass sexual assaults in Cologne, Germany to a typical Friday night on Birmingham Broad Street, like the boisterous actions of drunken people trying to hook up is somehow the same as being molested. She believes in conspiracy theories like patriarchy. She attacked Corbyn over the lack of women in Corbyn's cabinet, even going so far as to attack one of the women in Corbyn's shadow cabinet, telling Diane Abbott to fuck off, which is something that I think maybe a lot of people would like to do, but then going on to brag about it in the media. Perhaps most relevant in terms of these rape tweets is that she said that she'd quite happily knife Corbyn in the front. Now, if we can understand that that isn't actually saying that she's going to assault him, if we understand that that's a figure of speech, even though it's a violent and threatening one, then can't we also understand that I wouldn't even rape you doesn't even rise to the level of a sarcastic and spurious threat? She derailed the Men's Day debates and so on once they eventually came about, and before that was trying to block them from taking place. So she is indeed accurately describable as a massive bitch, a controversial figure who has been in trouble for many of the similar sort of things that Sargon is being attacked by. Now, I don't want to defend Sargon. I don't like his lurch to the right. I don't like his Brexit stance. I don't like his politics. I think he'd be disastrous as an MEP. But what has me pissed off here is that these attacks are ineffective and nonsensical. Anyone who honestly bothers to go and look into all of this will emerge from the other side more sympathetic to Sargon, understanding that Phillips is indeed a massive bitch, why she was being criticised by him and so on, the cleverness of the rhetorical trap he set. Well, let's add some context here, right? It wasn't widely known that she had been sexually assaulted or raped at the time all this happened. She was doing a media round complaining about spurious threats that she'd had off of the internet and using that as a launchpad and a vehicle to demand more internet censorship. So Sargon initiated the poorly thought out "I wouldn't even rape you" thing to show that she would then complain about the opposite, people saying that they wouldn't do horrible things to her, the opposite of a threat. And indeed she went around on a media circle again talking about that oh no, men online are telling me that they wouldn't rape me, so we need to censor the internet. It's just transparent and obvious and nonsensical. I want people to effectively attack Sargon. I want people to effectively attack UKIP. This isn't it. This will only strengthen and bolster his support, gain him more supporters, and activate his base. Criticise him for other things. Sargon likes to describe himself as liberal or liberalist and centrist. How can you be that and be part of UKIP? UKIP was already pretty far to the right of British politics, but now it's lurched to the far right of the Overton window of acceptable British politics. There are further right parties and groups, sure, but so far as acceptable political discourse goes, UKIP is at the very far right of what's acceptable there. They're chummy with racists. The violent bigot and liar, drug abuser and racist Tommy Robinson, Stephen Yaxley Lennon. So how can you be liberal or liberalist and support UKIP? Their defining policy is Brexit, which is seeking to force through an illegal and purely advisory referendum. You can't feign concern for democracy or say that you want to defend democracy and support UKIP, because they're trying to force this through. And it's people associated with UKIP and now with the Brexit Party, like Aaron Banks and so on, who are responsible for all kinds of grey or black political shenanigans around misuse of data, massive overspends in the campaign and so on. The vote was not legitimate. You deserve a legitimate vote, and we should have a legitimate and binding vote that's properly overseen so that none of these shenanigans take place. But if you really believe that you want to defend democracy, then you should be demanding a second referendum, not trying to force through that corrupted referendum on the basis of some fascistic, populist, will of the people nonsense. They want to cut off access to the NHS to foreigners living in this country. You might say fair enough, but the thing is, the fact that we provide aid to people in this country who fall ill means that we get a reciprocity there, so that Brits abroad, whether on holiday or whatever else, get access to healthcare in other nations. And there's 1.3 million Brits living permanently abroad, many more than that going abroad on holidays and so on, who will be left in the lurch if you do that. They want to lower immigration and so on. You may say fair enough, but the NHS is reliant on immigrant workers, and we can't make up the difference by fiddling around at the edges of training doctors and nurses and whatever else. The supply simply isn't there and can't be there without truly radical reform, which is not what they're suggesting. They want to limit access to the NHS to people who have an NHS card. That will essentially be a de facto identity card, which liberals have traditionally opposed as it's kind of fascistic and can be used for voter suppression and things like that. They lie about immigration law, immigration controls, pay no heed to the practical issues around it, and want to increase the apparatus of the state when it comes to borders. Another right-wing authoritarian shift which you can't support if you claim to be liberal. And they want to deny people who've come to this country, refugees and so on, they want to deny them access to social housing. And they blame the shortage of social housing on immigrants and refugees rather than Thatcher's right to buy scheme, which gobbled up everything that we had available. And their suggestions for reforms and building tons of homes is only short term and will not solve the issue. They want to expand on conservative authoritarian control of schools, concentrating on the 3 R's, bringing back classist grammar schools, thereby cutting off the working class from opportunity. And they want to remove LGBT tolerance education, teaching kids that there is such a thing as gay or bisexual or trans or whatever else. Yeah, it's not propaganda. That is just a false representation of what's going on. That's the view of the extremist Muslims that they would otherwise be against. Speaking of LGBT, they don't only want to gut education on gender and sexual issues, they want to repeal the legislation that grants protection based on characteristics like gender and sexuality. Now, currently the legislation is pretty universalist, so as a man, I get protection against discrimination from my gender. As a heterosexual, I get protection from discrimination against my sexuality. As cisgender, I get protection against prejudice based on that. They want to repeal all of this, which basically makes it open season to suffer prejudice at the hands of anybody for any reason based on your innate immutable characteristics. Fuck that. That's not liberal, is it? That's not centrist. That's a far right kind of policy. Now, I will admit that some of these laws, like preferential hiring and so on, go too far, but if you just gut the entire law and remove it rather than reforming it, then you're just creating a whole bunch of other issues and giving license to bigots. They want to scrap foreign aid, another xenophobic and dangerous policy, because foreign aid helps take some of the heat out of foreign relations, gives us diplomatic leverage, encourages trade deals, which we're going to need if we do leave the EU. So that's incredibly short-sighted and doesn't understand its role in geopolitics. It just goes on and on. They're opposed to an EU army, okay, fair enough, but that's not exactly what's really being proposed. What's being proposed is more military cooperation. Personally, I have no issue with an EU military, but still, they want to withdraw from the degree of cooperation that we already have within the EU, which makes us more vulnerable, which makes everyone more vulnerable, which makes the world more vulnerable to another large-scale conflict of some kind. And they want our military to be able to get away with war crimes by setting a kind of statute of limitations and allowing people to defend themselves by saying that they were just following orders. Something that I thought we had all agreed post-World War II wasn't an excuse for genocide or torture or medical experiments on prisoners. You know, just following orders when you're a guard at a death camp was not considered to be an excuse, but they want it to be. They want to massively increase police spending, but ineffectively, on bobbies on the beat and things like that, rather than technological and other innovations that are actually cost effective. They want to slow the motion of qualified graduates into becoming officers rather than, you know, plebs. They want to go back to a system where you have to kind of prove yourself on the ground, on the beat, so to speak, before you progress to being a detective or an officer of some kind. You might think that's fair enough, and to a degree you'd probably be right, but we fast-track military officers, and it's hard to get people who are graduates who expect a certain degree of salary and cushiness and so on into the police force if you have to put them through that bullshit first. So it's contradictory. They want to take us out of European cooperation to fight organised crime across international lines. Criminals are working internationally, the police need to too, but their antipathy towards Europe makes them want to take us out of that. They want to harden prison sentencing as well. They want the majority of prisoners to serve their full sentence. That's authoritarian and dangerous, especially given the sheer number of miscarriages of justice that are being exposed over time. And we know empirically that reform and release works better than punishment. Right? But they want to build more prisons to house the many, many more people they want to arrest and keep in prison, which appears to be a shift towards an American-style, semi-private prison industrial complex. That's authoritarian and not remotely liberal. They have a nostalgic commitment to manufacturing. They don't seem to believe in climate change, and they want to move us back onto coal. They want to gut the funding and subsidies for renewable and clean energy. They're essentially climate change deniers, and that should be a no-go today. It's just a national and international scale group of NIMBYs not in my backyard. And the pièce de résistance, the cherry on top of all this illiberal bullshit, is that they want to gut BBC funding, which will make it inherently and innately biased, and they want to sell off the public interest in Channel 4. That doesn't help anybody. Perhaps the most telling thing that they are not actually on the side of working people is that they want to abolish inheritance tax. So the rich are going to get richer under UKIP. These are the things he should be held account to. Mr. Benjamin, you call yourself a liberal, but the party to which you owe your allegiance wants to gut legislation to protect minorities from discrimination, and not just minorities but everyone. So as a liberal, how can you support this? These are the questions that should be asked. This is the manifesto that his nose should be rubbed in like a naughty puppy having its nose rubbed in its business. Because you can't claim to support democracy, to be anti-authoritarian, to be liberal, and also support UKIP. It just doesn't work. Stop attacking him on bullshit. You're only making him stronger. Zang.
Turn up the bass, turn up the treble. Texas rockabilly rebel. Turn up the bass, turn up the treble. Texas rockabilly rebel. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.